You are clinging to the sheer outer wall of Castle Dracula, face pressed against the cold mortarless stone. Your limbs bend at impossible angles, moving with a fluid, insectile grace as you descend into the night. The sight in the window above, a young man's face frozen in horror, is the last thing your human mind can comprehend before it shatters. This is the story of the solicitor who traveled to meet his client and found a monster waiting in the dark, but that horror is weeks away. For now, in a London office, the rain streaks the window as Jonathan Harker opens a letter sealed with strange wax. The castle is silent. It has been silent for 300 years, but tonight, in the deepest hour, a single candle burns. He sits at a desk of black oak, reviewing a file from London. His fingers trace the embossed letterhead, Hawkins and Harker, feeling the texture of paper, a forgotten sensation. You know that feeling. Reviewing profiles late, looking for the right fit. He finds it in the meticulous notes of a junior solicitor, Jonathan Harker. A mind that believes in order, in contracts, in the solidity of walls and deeds. It is a quality the Count has not seen in a very long time. He selects this one. He writes the invitation, the ink flowing in a hand that has not written to a living soul in centuries. He seals it with wax, the scent of beeswax and old stone filling the air. In London, 3 weeks from now, a young man will open this letter and see only a business opportunity. He will have no idea who has chosen him, or why. The rain streaks the window of Jonathan Harker's London office, a gray afternoon light pooling on his desk. The letter arrives. You know the feeling opening something important, the weight of the paper different in your hands. This paper is thick, cold, the envelope sealed with a crest he does not recognize. He breaks the wax. The handwriting inside is elegant, precise, yet the phrasing is slightly archaic, a formality that hints at something beyond the ordinary business transaction. It is an invitation to travel to Transylvania, to Castle Dracula, to finalize the purchase of Carfax Abbey. A professional thrill warms him, pushing aside a faint, unplaceable chill. He glances at the photograph on his desk, Mina, smiling forever preserved in that silver frame. Her imagined pride solidifies his decision. He takes his own pen, the ink flowing smoothly across his acceptance. He writes of trains and schedules, of documents to be prepared, bridging a distance he does not yet comprehend. He posts the letter as the street lamps gutter to life in the rain. His journey has now begun, a thread pulled taut across a map, from the heart of London to the dark spine of the Carpathians. He has no idea who has chosen him, or why. But the thread is pulled from both ends. As Jonathan's letter travels east, the one who awaits it stands at a high window in Castle Dracula, watching the eastern sky bleed from black to a bruised, reluctant gray dawn. His palms rest flat on the cold stone sill, feeling the centuries of frost and fracture within the rock. The castle around him is a monument to a silence so complete it has become architectural. No voices, only the wind's low moan through cracked battlements, a sound like a breath held for 300 years. He rehearses. The modern English phrases feel strange in his mind, a language that has evolved without him. "Welcome, Mr. Harker. I trust your journey was—" He stops, the unspoken words dissolving. You know that nervous rehearsal, that script you write in your head before meeting someone new after a long, long solitude. For him, it is not mere social anxiety. It is the terrifying prospect of connection itself. The sun's first true spear of light breaches the distant Carpathian peaks. It does not warm him, it warns him. He turns from the window, the dawn at his back, and retreats into the waiting shadows of the hall. The young solicitor will be here soon. The thought is a tremor in the profound stillness, not of hunger, but of a loneliness so deep it has forgotten its own shape, and now seeks to borrow one from a stranger. The world outside Jonathan Harker's compartment window grew older by the mile. On the third evening, forests thickened into dark, unbroken walls, and the villages grew sparse, their windows glowing like lonely, watchful eyes. He wrote these observations in his journal by the swaying lamplight, the steel nib scratching a fragile counterpoint to the train's rhythm. Other passengers whispered in languages he did not understand, the word Transylvania surfacing like a stone in a stream. His hand went to the small crucifix at his throat, a parting gift from Mina. Its familiar weight was the only anchor in a sea of changing shadows. You know that feeling, traveling somewhere unfamiliar, watching the world transform outside the window, the precise moment you realize you are truly irrevocably far from home. The train began to slow, its brakes sighing, a remote station platform lit by a single guttering oil lamp materialized from the gloom. Jonathan closed his journal, the leather cover soft beneath his fingers. As he gathered his belongings, the compartment lamp flickered once, twice, as if the very light was uncertain of this place. The final leg of his journey awaited him in the cold, silent dark beyond the glass. The carriage ride through the Borgo Pass was a descent into a different century. The wind screamed down from the Carpathians, a sound so old and cold it seemed to peel the warmth from Jonathan's bones. He watched the driver's hunched silhouette, the man never speaking, never turning, as if he were merely another feature of the storm. The crucifix felt heavy and small against his skin. For hours, there was only the rocking darkness and the wolves, their cries weaving through the gale, not from one direction but from all around, a moving circle of sound that paced the carriage. You know that peculiar anxiety of waiting up for someone, listening for a sound in the night, the mix of anticipation and dread when you are about to break a very long solitude. In his library, the Count heard them too. He stood perfectly still, a London newspaper from 1885 brittle in his hands, its accounts of Parliament and fog so achingly distant. The wolves were his sentinels, their voices charting the carriage's painful progress through the pass. He did not move but listened, not with hunger, but with a profound, calcified loneliness. Here was a mind that still believed in maps and contracts, drawing nearer through the ancient dark. A mind he had not touched in 300 years. The carriage wheels found cobblestone. Dracula set the paper aside. It crumbled at the edges like dry leaves. He heard the iron gates groan open far below. The guest had arrived. The carriage door opened into a wall of rain. Jonathan stepped down, the cold seeping through his greatcoat as if the fabric were not there at all. The courtyard was a pit of shadow, lit by a single torch that guttered in the wind, its light dancing across immense, silent walls. The iron gates swung shut behind him without a sound. He smelled wet stone and something older, the scent of a church closed for too long. Stepping into an unfamiliar building late at night, the way the air changes, the silence that feels heavier than outside, that is what he felt now, magnified 100-fold. A great door of blackened wood stood ajar ahead. He moved toward it, his boots loud on the cobbles, the only sound in the world besides the storm. He crossed the threshold. The door closed behind him with a final, solid thud that echoed through a vast stone throat of a hall. From beyond the walls he heard the carriage depart, the sound of its wheels swallowed by the gale almost instantly. He was alone. And then he was not. A flame appeared at the far end of the hall, held aloft, and a voice, deep and strangely formal, spoke from the darkness. "Welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own will." The voice came from the direction of the flame. Jonathan moved toward it, the sound of his own footsteps swallowed by the cavernous space. The air grew warmer, carrying the scent of wood smoke and old wax. The flame resolved into a fireplace, large enough to stand within, and before it stood a tall, elderly gentleman. He was dressed in black, his posture unnervingly still. "I am Dracula," he said, extending his hand. Jonathan took it. The grip was firm, but the skin was cold, like marble that had stolen warmth from the fire. The Count's eyes held the reflection of the flames, but they did not flicker. They were points of fixed, intense light, meeting someone whose presence feels intensely focused on you that moment when a handshake carries more weight than words. That is what Jonathan felt now. Dracula, for his part, saw a young man's face, flushed from travel and alarm, yet still bright with a curiosity that had not yet learned its limits. He felt a sharp, forgotten pang, not hunger, but envy for that unbroken vitality. Centuries of silence had made such a visitor a seismic event. "Your journey has been long, you must drink." The Count moved to a side table where a decanter of wine awaited. He poured the glass, a fragile stemmed thing that looked centuries old. Jonathan accepted it, their fingers not touching. The wine was sweet and heavy. "I trust your rooms at Purfleet will be satisfactory," Dracula began, his voice measured. The conversation unfolded, polite, meticulous questions about London property law. But beneath each word lay an unspoken layer, Jonathan's growing unease, and the Count's profound, calcified loneliness, studying this living man as one might study the last page of a book soon to be closed. The first night in the castle had begun. The guest room was cold. A fire crackled in the hearth, yet the chill was in the stones themselves, seeping into Jonathan's bones as he lay rigid in the canopied bed. The castle did not sleep. It ticked and shifted around him, a slow, wet scratching within the walls, as of something dragging across mortar, and distant whispers that held the cadence of speech but none of its familiar sounds. Waking in a strange place, hearing sounds the building shouldn't make, that primal alertness when your environment refuses to behave as expected. This was his world now. He rose, lighting his candle, and opened his journal. His handwriting, usually so precise, betrayed him. The letters slanting, the ink blotting. May 7, 3 a.m., he wrote. "The Count was most courteous at dinner, yet I cannot shake the feeling." He paused, listening. The whispering ceased. In its place came a new sound, a soft, definitive click from somewhere far below, like a heavy door settling into its frame. He blew out the candle. In the sudden, perfect dark, the silence felt deliberate. He held his breath, waiting for the whisper or the scratch to return. It did not. The only sound was the frantic rhythm of his own heart, a living drum in the dead stone, quiet. Above him, the tapestry on the wall seemed to shift in the non-existent breeze, its woven hunters and hounds appearing to move in the gloom. He closed his eyes, but the darkness behind his lids was no different. The castle held him, listening. Below, in the crypt, the Count stood motionless before a line of stone coffins. Dawn's first gray light did not reach here. The only illumination was a single candle, its flame undisturbed by any draught. He had watched the Englishman sleep, that fragile temporary peace, and now he stood in the company of permanence. He spoke then. The words were old, a language of court and countryside dead for 300 years. They were not for any ear but the dust, to speak to an empty room because there is no one else to hear, he whispered, the syllables strange on his tongue. That private moment when loneliness ceases to be a feeling and becomes a physical presence, another occupant in the silence. His confession hung in the frigid air, absorbed by the stone. His pale hand rose, brushing the cracked surface of a small portrait on the wall. The woman's face was obscured by time, only the suggestion of eyes and dark hair remaining. He felt nothing of her, only the grit of ancient pigment and the cold of the plaster. The centuries had sanded all sentiment to texture. A floorboard groaned faintly far above. Jonathan was stirring. The sound was a pinprick in the vast quiet. Dracula's hand fell to his side. The ancient grief, so briefly given voice, folded inward again, compressed back into the stillness of his bearing. The candle flame shivered, as if in a sigh, and then burned perfectly straight once more. The great hall at noon was a cavern of dust motes dancing in sunbeams. Jonathan, pushing roast pheasant around his plate, attempted to discuss the Carfax deed. Dracula, seated opposite, merely watched his own plate pristine. The questions began instead, detailed, hungry inquiries about London's electric lights, the speed of trains, the immediacy of telegrams. His voice held a scholar's curiosity, but his eyes held the desperate focus of a man deciphering a map to a world that had left him behind. Jonathan felt a slow, cold understanding. This was not hospitality, it was archaeology. Talking to someone who seems fascinated by your ordinary life, that unease when you realize your normalcy is someone else's artifact. He excused himself, murmuring about correspondence. Long after the door shut, Dracula remained. He stared at the congealing food, then at the empty chair. The questions hung in the silent air unanswered. For a moment, his expression was not one of menace, but of profound, unbridgeable loss. The connection had been attempted, and had failed. Something in the ancient calculus of his patience quietly shifted. The library at dusk was a landscape of long shadows cast by a single guttering candle. Jonathan sought a map, anything to anchor this place to a knowable geography. As he reached for a heavy atlas, movement caught his eye through the tall, narrow window. A dark shape descended the sheer outer wall of the castle, face pressed to the stone. It moved with a fluid, insectile grace, limbs bending at impossible angles, clinging to mortarless joins. It was the Count. The sight was so profoundly wrong that Jonathan's mind rejected it. This was that frozen moment, seeing something that breaks your understanding of reality, your brain scrambling to deny what your eyes insist is true. He did not scream. He backed away, breath trapped in his throat, until the high wing of a chair stopped him. The shape was gone. The wall was just a wall, stained by centuries of weather. Later, in his room, the words erupted onto the journal page, in a frantic, sloping hand. I saw the Count crawling down the castle wall like a lizard. The admission, once written, made the horror solid. He could not unsee it. He could not explain it. He shoved the journal deep beneath the mattress, as if containing the words could contain the truth. He sat on the bed's edge, listening. The castle did not creak. It breathed a slow stone inhalation of wind through unseen apertures. He was a specimen in a jar, and the lid was sealed. From a high vantage, Dracula observed the young man's light finally extinguish. He had felt the gaze from the library window, a pinprick of human shock against his ancient hide. It was, he reflected, always the moment of witnessing that broke them. Not the monster, but the undeniable proof of him. The loneliness deepened. Another connection, severed before it could even form. From the highest battlement, Dracula watched the single square of yellow light that was Jonathan's window. The young man had seen. The fragile fiction of hospitality was shattered, and yet, standing in the razor wind, the Count felt not anger, but a hollow relief. After 3 centuries of perfect, suffocating secrecy, another living mind finally held a fragment of his truth. The weight of it, shared, felt almost like companionship. He remembered the sound of Jonathan's voice in the dining hall, asking about telegraph lines. The eager, living curiosity of it. A taste of a world that had long since turned its page. It was the moment you realize a relationship cannot continue, not from malice, but from the simple, sad fact of who you are. The light in the window went out. Jonathan had retreated into the dark, alone with his new, terrible knowledge. Dracula's choice crystallized, cold and final. The solicitor would not be leaving as a guest. The connection, so briefly and desperately cherished, was now a threat to be managed. He turned from the edge, the ancient stone cold beneath his palms. The shadows of the corridor welcomed him, flowing around his form as he dissolved into the deeper darkness of his home. The decision was made. The silence of the castle would soon be absolute once more. I close the journal. The book is heavy in my hands, the leather cover cool against my palms. In this quiet room, the story settles around me like dust. Both men were trapped, you see. Jonathan by the stone walls and the locked doors, Dracula by the centuries, by a loneliness so complete it had reshaped him from the inside out. The true horror of the castle wasn't the monster under the bed. It was the profound, echoing silence that made a monster necessary. You know that feeling? Closing a book after a disturbing story. The way the room feels different, as if the words have left traces in the air, a chill that wasn't there before. I reach over and turn off the desk lamp. The room plunges into a softer dark. The only light now is the faint blue glow from my phone screen, left open to a satellite map. It shows a stretch of the Carpathians, a specific jagged peak. The castle is still there, of course, empty. A geometric shape of shadow and stone against the digital terrain. The story ends here, in this silence. In your silence listening. The dark outside your window is just the ordinary dark. Probably.